No? Yes? All right, let's hear it for the New York One appearance.
Yeah. It's the road to City Hall. I didn't know the connection.
Well, City Hall's in flames, maybe. But you were saying some interesting things about the dystopian novel and how we're, maybe in older days everything took place 100 years in the future, 50 years in the future, but now, time is sort of caught up in a way, and we can't, that really the way to do it is to set it right around the corner. Maybe you have more thoughts on that.
Well, this novel is set like a couple years in the future. It's never made explicit, and I think that as much as I love dystopian fiction, and I read a lot of dystopian fiction before writing this novel, I didn't really feel like this was a dystopian novel in a conventional way, because I feel like that form is a bit quaint now. I mean, in the typical dystopian novel, it's set at least 20, 25 years in the future, and there's this implicit warning that if we don't get our act together, if we don't question our government's authoritarian tendencies, or we don't, start recycling, whatever things are going to be, we're going to be screwed. This is the hell that we're going to inherit, in 20 or 30 years. And I feel like we're already in a dystopian time, and it's already happening. And I think you see that especially with things like climate change, but everything else seems to be snowballing too. Is I think the sense that you have living in today, when just bad news is constantly coming at you. But these are things that you write about as well. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Soylent Green is already people.
Right.
But I do remember that what you said struck me, because I remember great disappointment as a kid watching a Twilight Zone that was set in the future, but it was I was watching it a few years after it was set, right? And so it was like, it was 1978 and everything had fallen apart. Right. But it was 1980 when I was watching it, and I think it was, but Lee Marvin was a trainer of a robot boxer. That's all I remember. But but I liked what you said. But yeah, I feel it's rushing upon us, and so it's not. Yeah, especially with some of the climate change stuff, as you read about it, I guess you never get that feeling of, well, if we just get our act together anymore. That seemed like that window closed.
Yeah, and I feel like, and at the same time that doesn't mean that novelists, especially fiction writers, should be writing polemical books like we need to save the planet, or I think that's sort of past, and the question is more, well, what does living in this time do to us? How does it affect us? And I think in your stories, there's one answer might be extreme neurosis, as in my novel.
Yeah, not as a lifestyle choice.
No, not necessarily. The only possible response.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know what sanity would be, or an idea of the normal would be right now, and so yet people still cling to certain structures or models that they grew up with, and I think that the kind of friction between those things is sort of very unsettling for a lot of people, and I do try to explore that.
And you write also about New York a lot, and about the current moment, and that was one of the hardest things for me writing this book, and I feel like I've been singed enough by writing about basically the present. For instance, there's a major hurricane hits. In the novel, I think it's not giving away anything, it's on the cover, but in the middle act, there's a huge hurricane hits New York, and causes massive flooding. And I was editing the final galley proofs of it when Sandy happened, and I thought at first I'd probably have to just throw out the book. Then I selfishly didn't. But I feel like writing about.
It's nice you had that moral moment.
Yeah, there's like a pause. Never mind. But I think things move so fast now that it feels scary to be writing about the moment, because even if you finish, say, a short story, by the time it gets published in a magazine or in a book, a year or two later, you might be behind the times in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think and Philip Roth wrote about that, whatever it was, 50 years ago or 40 years ago. how it's impossible for the fiction writer to really keep up with real events, and so you have to do things, and I think you do it in your book with the Seattle part, where you alter reality at the very beginning, so we don't have to really cling to our notion of events. You know?
Right. Yeah. That's I think that was one. The novel begins with the Seattle earthquake, which is another thing that is. I was more worried about that happening actually than a flood happening, because Seattle's really due. If you have any friends in Seattle, tell them to. But maybe we should open it up to if people have any questions for Sam.